Missouri has plenty of options at quarterback, but navigating this whole situation is why Eli Drinkwitz gets the big bucks.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And today we got news of Missouri football's first portal entrant into the transfer portal on National Signing Day for high school recruiting, by the way. So obviously going to touch on both of those topics. Also, Missouri basketball taking on Notre Dame in South Bend tonight. Quite simply, are the Tigers for real? That's the question I think all Missouri fans are asking themselves right now. But you know what? First, before I start, real quickly, just got to tell you today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And you know what? This Missouri quarterback situation this offseason, it's not as though Missouri lacks options, that's for sure. In fact, some might argue Missouri has almost too many options, depending on how things play out this offseason. Of course, the question is, does Missouri have enough in its quarterback room? And that question alone, I think, is going to be complicated because you have a bunch of, all three of your guys, whether it's Matt Zollers, it's Beau Pribula, it's Sam Horn, by the way, all have question marks, and I think very obvious ones. And then there's this. On top of that, on Power Mizzou this morning, their message boards were talking about Beau Pribula and Penn State's possible interest in having him back. There's one poster named Negus Webster Chan. Yes, you Missouri basketball fans from back in the Frank Haith era will remember that name, but no, I don't believe it's the actual basketball player. But this anonymous poster has had good information before, and Gabe DeArmond confirmed that it sounds like Penn State has made some overtures here. I'll just say that from my sources, and that source is Zach Sako over at Locked On Penn State. I just ran this idea by him this morning. He didn't sound quite as sure. He doesn't really want Penn State to be looking for a quarterback. I would also point out that Penn State doesn't have a coach yet, so I don't necessarily want to overreact to this nugget one way or the other. Certainly I could see, hey, with all of the back channeling and direct messaging that is capable in this day and age, I'm not doubting that overtures, at least beginnings of that type of thing, have been made. But again, let's not overreact to that bit of news. I just think that the point here is that this is another, maybe at least another variable that just goes to show you how complicated this Missouri quarterback situation could be this offseason. And back to Pribula, by the way. Let's go back to the Kansas game where I thought Pribula, yes, he had the fumble that was returned by a touchdown by the Jayhawks. I thought other than that, Pribula was awesome in the game. I think most Missouri fans would have agreed with that. And I get it. Kansas isn't very good. That's one thing you would throw at me. But neither is Arkansas, especially defensively. The question is, again, another variable, can that version of Beau Pribula from the Kansas game come back? I've seen speculation on maybe he had a hand injury in that particular game, by the way, or at least early in September. Perhaps it was just as simple as a loss of confidence. The defenders, obviously, the opposition may have figured Pribula and the Missouri offense out to one extent or another. Regardless, again, the question is, can Missouri get back to that version of Beau Pribula in this Missouri offense again? Also, obviously, the question is Matt Zollers going to be ready to carry the load next season? I think we can all say he wasn't ready this season, but frankly, that's an unfair standard for the true freshman who, again, suffered a serious injury, very similar to Beau Pribula's, by the way, about a year ago. So to expect him to just be it's not as though he has the most experience of a high school player I've ever seen either, as a guy who is a high-level baseball player, a basketball player as well in high school. Simply put, Zollers needs more experience. He needs more time. And, well, he'll have, 9-10 months here to get ready. So the answer to that question is, frankly, unknowable, of course. But how much faith do you have in him? Almost all of these questions are coming down to faith. How much faith do you have in Beau Pribula? How much faith do you have in Matt Zollers? And frankly, well, there may be a question on that with Sam Horn as well, if he decides to come back. And I think most Missouri fans would probably bet on Sam Horn heading off to Major League Baseball with the Dodgers. But we've had those thoughts before, and yet Sam returns anyway. It just doesn't seem like he's ready to give up football yet. So I'm just not sure what's going to happen with Sam Horn. I'm not ready to make any assumptions with him whatsoever. But again, if he comes back, if everybody comes back, well, now you've got 3 quarterbacks in the room. Are you even able to bring in a portal quarterback at that point? Do you think you need to bring in a portal quarterback, or do you have enough faith that one of those 3 guys, if it indeed is one of those 3 guys, comes back, all 3, I should say, you have faith in one of them to pan out? That's the big question. I think probably the bigger likelihood is that one of those guys obviously is not back next year. And then you probably are looking at a quarterback almost certainly in the portal. This is something Missouri's got to figure out pretty quickly, because just like we saw in last year's transfer portal, obviously the quarterback position moves very, very quickly, to the point where Beau Pribula, of course, famously had to leave Penn State before they even played their first round game of the college football playoff. So to me, when it comes to the portal and the quarterback position, it was just like last year. To me, you couldn't come into the 2025 season counting only on Sam Horn and Matt Zollers. So I thought Missouri had to go get a quarterback regardless. I think it's the same question this year. What can you count on at the position? That's what Missouri and obviously Eli Drinkwitz is going to have to figure out. To me, that's really the $10 million question in obvious reference to his extension. And the Missouri Tiger basketball team currently boasts the nation's second longest active win streak at 8 games, by the way, which sounds impressive until you realize that they've played the second easiest schedule in the entire country. By the way, I was recently saying, well, there's 350, 360 Division I teams. In fact, there's 365 Division I college basketball teams this year. So that's an easy enough number to remember. 365 days in a year, 365 Division I college basketball teams this season. But again, Missouri 364 in terms of strength of schedule. So the Tigers about to figure something out this week. They play Notre Dame tonight. They play Kansas on Sunday. Let's talk about the Tigers and what I'm looking for tonight against the Fighting Irish in the Tigers' second true road game of this 2025-26 season. But you know what? First, I got to tell you that the holidays always feel a little easier when you already know the perfect gift. And frankly, the folks over at Omaha Steaks almost make it too easy. Omaha Steaks delivers handcrafted perfection right to your friends and your family, just right to their door. It's a great week to jump in, by the way. Their cyber sale is here. The deals are huge, and a variety of stuff, by the way. Not only their incredible steaks, but burgers, comfort meals, sides, desserts. It's something for everyone, truly. So save big on unforgettable gifts with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com for 50% off site-wide and an extra 20% off select favorites during their cyber sale. And for an additional $35 off, use promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That is omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. Terms apply. See site for details. By the way, just quickly, speaking of quarterbacks, just some breaking news I happened to see. Well, Vanderbilt has flipped the #1 high school quarterback in the country from Georgia. Wow. Never thought I'd say those words, but here we are in the NIL era. Again, lots of different stuff is happening. If you're in the SEC in particular, you've got a chance, even if you're Vanderbilt. That's why Clark Lee is staying at Vanderbilt. Well, it's one of the many reasons why Eli Drinkwitz is staying at Missouri. And I'll get to more on signing day, and yes, the first person to leave Missouri right now to enter the transfer portal for the Tigers. But you know what? I do want to talk some hoops first, because the Tigers play Notre Dame tonight in South Bend, 8 o'clock, by the way, second true road game. I'm curious to see what this crowd is going to look like for Notre Dame midweek game here. You'd think the students at the very least would pack it in, but regardless, the Tigers, again, because of that strength of schedule, well, a pretty wide range of opinions on Missouri so far, even just based on the numbers. Ken Pom likes the Tigers quite a bit as the 29th best team in the country, whereas in net rating, Missouri more like 51st. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure what to make of this team simply because of that schedule. Because you look at the Tigers' offensive numbers in particular, well, I think these next couple ball games, especially against Kansas, of course, will tell us just how real they are. Missouri, and just in terms of percentage so far, 28th from the three-point line, again, out of 365. So 28th out of 365, fourth in the country in two-point field goal percentage, too. Also fifth in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. So the thing is, obviously, when you're playing VMI, Howard, Cleveland State, South Carolina State, Prairie View A&M, not exactly a lot of great centers are going to come from those programs because, well, they're not a ton of great centers in college basketball, period. They're not easy to find. So the idea that Missouri is a really elite offensive rebounding team, I'll believe it when I see it in the SEC, and I'll start to believe it more, obviously, against Notre Dame and certainly Kansas and Illinois coming up as well. And really, if you look at it, though, you know, the Tigers obviously played who they have to play, or more accurately, who Dennis Gates wanted them to play. Really, turnovers and free throw percentages are the only negatives I can really come up with here on offense. One thing I'm going to continue to watch for certain is just how many screens Missouri is setting this season. As I said in my previous episode, it's just one thing I started to realize. It's a trend I've noticed in the NBA and heard a lot of people talk about in the NBA. And then I thought, wait a second, is this how the Tigers are playing this season? Are there fewer ball screens being set this year? I really could be nuts. This could just be the power of suggestion here, but it does seem like that Missouri is setting fewer screens than it did in previous seasons. And by the way, I had another thought while sort of drifting off away from maybe the actual game there late in that Cleveland State ball game there on Black Friday afternoon. But I have to say, I was amused once again when Sean Phillips was getting into it with guys on the other team, getting frustrated and slamming his hands together and stuff like that on the bench. And, you know, I just thought, this guy, man, he is a live wire, isn't he? And I have to say, on this particular team, I really like having a live wire because it seems like most of these guys are pretty laid back, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, give me a bunch of guys who are laid back versus a lot of guys who are high-strung for the most part. But I do have to say, having at least one guy who's maybe a little bit unpredictable and maybe has a bit of an intimidating energy at 7 feet tall too, not the worst thing in the world for, again, a team that seems to have a bunch of laid-back, semi-quiet guys like Luke Northweather and Javon Porter. That just seems to be kind of their attitude. And, again, nothing wrong with that. I just think having one guy who's a little bit of a live wire out there, call me crazy, I kind of like it. And redshirt freshman James Madison is the Missouri player entering the transfer portal. And I have to say I'm somewhat disappointed by this. He's 6'3", 210, four-star recruit, by the way, out of a big-time Florida high school, St. Thomas Aquinas. Again, just not so much because he was a big-time player for Missouri, obviously, played just 19 snaps this season. But I did like his personality and was hoping he'd stick around. I thought he really embraced Mizzou, that's for sure. He certainly did on social media anyway. So I wish him well because it didn't seem like there was a clear path to playing time for him next season. An understandable move by James Madison, especially in this era. Going to be curious to see where he winds up, how much that high school pedigree ends up, where that ends up taking him, or if people are more like just wondering, hey, why couldn't he get on the field with a Missouri passing game that really struggled this season? Again, hard to evaluate a guy who barely played at all, was I think in on maybe one passing play this entire season. Hard to evaluate that other than to say that obviously Missouri didn't think he was going to help this particular season. But again, I wish the young guy well. And indeed, when it comes to recruiting, I got to say, National Signing Day doesn't quite move the needle like it used to, did it? Again, lots of exciting days when Dorial Green Beckham would sign with Missouri and all that kind of stuff. Just those type of moments are few and far between these days, although there are still some flips to watch for if you're a Missouri fan. But really, that's about it. Missouri, the thing to note here, Missouri expected to sign about the 25th or so ranked high school class, depending on who you cite. And I think realistically, hey, obviously if you're a Missouri fan, you'd love to see the Tigers have the number one high school class and the number one portal class every single season. Maybe Lane Kiffin will be able to pull that off now over at LSU. But realistically, I think if you're Missouri, when it just comes to your asset allocation, well, I think obviously you still need a solid high school class every season, but I think trying to get a top 10 high school class at this point, I think it's kind of a bit of a waste of resources. I think if you're Missouri, it's better to try to get a top 10 to 15 kind of portal class on an annual basis and try to supplement. Again, try to get a class that is ranked about here, 25 or so, even 30 or 35. If that cost means, hey, putting more assets, again, into the portal, to me, that's just a smart move to make, not only in the short term, because Missouri's done very well in the portal, I would say. They've had a higher hit rate than most. I think they've had a much higher hit rate in the portal than in the high school class, which I'm sure most people do. It's just, obviously, it's easier to evaluate. For example, Chris McClellan played at Florida. Well, you could kind of tell what he can do in the SEC. Even somebody like Zion Young, who was previously at Michigan State, you get enough film on a guy in the Big Ten. If you like his film in the Big Ten, there's a good chance you're going to like his film at Missouri too. So, again, I just think if you have a limited amount of money, I think you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck in the portal than you do in high school. So, frankly, I applaud and approve of what Missouri is doing in that regard. And I brought up recently the Penn State job in this show and how it's still open. Well, gosh, I've had people telling me that Penn State, Auburn, Eli Drinkwitz, to both of those places was practically a done deal at one point. Well, alert Jay Nixon, you're off the hook for the done deal remark, I suppose. But that phrase has lost complete and total meaning to me, and to the point where if anybody ever uses the phrase done deal with me anymore, I'm just going to assume that they're wrong about everything. So let's get to that here in just a little bit, and also why the comparisons of Eli Drinkwitz and Brian Kelly don't really cut the mustard for this podcaster. But you know what? Before I talk about that, we got to talk about Gametime, because Gametime, would you believe, it's a place to not only get Missouri tickets, but tickets to the World Cup too. Yes, back in North America. For the first time since 1994, 48 teams, by the way, for the first time ever, the biggest World Cup ever. And usually getting tickets is nearly impossible. Well, that's why I use Gametime. It's clutch. It gives fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging tickets, and it makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. Pull up the app. The layout makes it so simple to scroll through all the matchups and compare the seat views and take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets. And every match, concert, or event with Gametime, download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 off your first purchase. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. And back when there was a decent amount of chatter involving Eli Drinkwitz to Penn State, well, I saw some people bring up the idea of culture fits. And, of course, Brian Kelly is now looked at as the ultimate example of a bad culture fit, going from, well, Notre Dame, the north where he had spent most of his career, into the deep south of Louisiana. Of course, Brian Kelly famously putting on a very fake accent during his early days there. I'll just say that I don't really see that as the same thing. I would agree that Eli Drinkwitz is a better culture fit in the South. I was a little bit worried about Eli, just a tiny bit. Again, I always predicted that was always my prediction that Eli would come back, but I was never 100% certain on it. And certainly there's a lot of things about Penn State that could lure any coach. My thought was, though, the idea of a culture fit. Listen, compared to Brian Kelly, Brian Kelly was just simply not well liked at LSU. I mean, on his way out, there wasn't anybody saying anything nice about Brian Kelly, and it seemed like when things were going poorly on the sidelines, his strategy was just to start F-bombing all of his assistants and players. I've never seen Eli Drinkwitz ever really be that guy, if you catch my drift. So the good news is for Missouri fans, again, this is just a great point here. Obviously, if Penn State is somewhat scrambling to find a coach here, well, who do you think Missouri would be looking for if Eli Drinkwitz had decided to leave? So thank goodness he's here. If you don't like this whole dog and pony show of the annual extensions, hey, I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm just going to say that this is a better timeline to live in than one where Missouri is searching for a new coach, because if Florida and Auburn are hiring group of 5 head coaches, well, obviously Missouri's going to be too, except especially based on timing here, well, they would have been kind of behind the 8 ball. And by the way, I made the case for Ahmad Hardy winning the Doak Walker for the nation's best running back yesterday. Hey, here's another good case for it, and a good number as well. 1,111 yards. Yes, 1,111. 1,111 rushing yards after contact for Ahmad Hardy this season. That is an absolutely incredible number. Chris McClellan, by the way, a guy who hasn't put up incredible numbers, but guess what? Nose tackles typically don't put up incredible numbers, but he's been one heck of a player for Missouri. In fact, this offseason, I should go back and look at how I did on this, by the way, but when I said this offseason who I thought the best players were on the Missouri roster, I had Chris McClellan number 1, and you know what? I don't feel too bad about that take. He was really good this season for the Tigers, and he was the SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week for his performance against Arkansas this week. And by the way, congrats to all of us who had Missouri's over on its season total. Whether you had 6.5 or 7.5, we cashed it. I was saying 8-4 all season long before getting optimistic, of course, as I often do, and I made my prediction and going to 9-3. But obviously the Tigers weren't too far off that number, so they got a pretty good handle on this team this offseason. Hopefully I'll have another good handle on this Missouri team this offseason as well, and Missouri will just force me to pick them to go undefeated in 2026. But obviously we'll see what happens. There's going to be a lot of dominoes falling in the transfer portal here over the next few weeks, and there's no better place to get all your takes on it than right here on Locked On Mizzou.